My next guest has been instrumental in promoting race relations in his career, has been active in elected politics and has been a keen interest in these matters. Issan Ghazni was born and bred in Nottingham. He's worked as a diversity consultant, has stood for Parliament for the Liberal Democrats, and he was a former diversity advisor to Vince Cable, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats. He's an established diversity consultant in Nottingham. He's with us for the full hour, and for the last 30 minutes we'll be reflecting on events in Pakistan. I'm pleased to say Issan Ghazni is joining us live from his home in Nottingham. Issan, assalamu alaikum, a very warm welcome to the programme. Great to have this conversation.
Wa alaikum salam, Shafiq, and I'm very grateful and honoured that you've invited me to your programme. Thank you.
The honour is all mine. Come on, let's start the beginning. Tell us a bit about your early childhood and growing up.
Well, Shafiq, I was born in Pakistan, and we're from a place called Gujarat, and I came to the UK when I was 3 years of age. So my whole life has been spent here in the UK. I went to school, college, university in the UK. We were called over by my father, who came to the UK in 1952. He was in the British Indian Army. He was a prisoner of war, a Japanese prisoner of war. And immediately after the war, he came to the UK. He settled in Nottingham. So that's basically where I've been all my life, in Nottingham. And lived here and studied here, and all my political activism and community work and everything that I have is based in Nottingham, really.
That's really important. Where did the interest in politics come from?
Well, basically, my father was a bit of a social worker. So if you've probably heard from other early settlers back in the 50s and 60s, when my father was one of the earliest Muslim Pakistani settlers in Nottingham. There were a few people, but he was one of the early ones. So when he came to Nottingham, there were people arriving all the time, but they couldn't speak English. But because of my father's involvement in the army and because of his time as a Japanese prisoner of war, he was a little bit more sort of savvy, and he could speak English, he could read and write. So he was available for all the new incoming people. He'd take them to hospital, doctor's appointments, if they had police problems, wherever there was an issue, he was there to help and guide them. So a lot of that, in a sense, was what I used to hear about as I was growing up. He died when I was aged 10, but, he did manage to have an influence on me. So that did help. My mother was a very strong figure as a woman, because she was left with 7 kids. I had 7 siblings. When my father died, I was aged 10, and the youngest sister was aged 6 months. So she was a strong figure in my life. And she was also amongst the female population of our local neighborhood. She was quite active. So all of these things had an influence upon me. And my mother always used to push me to go forward into politics. So it's basically my parental sort of influences and inspirations.
And then you look at that early generation, the 50s and 60s, racism was quite endemic, it was quite open, it was blatant. How has racism shaped your life?
Well, I mean, I don't know, you might be too young to remember Paki bashing and the National Front. Well, I grew up in that period of time, and racism was everywhere. But we had to develop a tough skin to be able to survive and to be able to continue with our lives. So racism had the effect on me of becoming a stronger person, in the sense that I wanted to do something for my community. It made me want to challenge race disparities in public bodies. I was aware of the racism in the police from a very early time, because the way in which the police used to talk to us made us feel like we were nothing. Yet when they spoke with white people, their whole demeanor and language changed. So I picked all this up very early on, and it had an influence upon me, mostly in terms of trying to fight for justice for our communities. And some people didn't go down that route, but maybe the sort of person I was, it did have an impact on me, of course.
Yeah. We're commemorating Stephen Lawrence Day this past couple of weeks. We've seen the murder of Stephen Lawrence significantly change race relations in this country. Now, looking back at the last 30 years, how do you assess race relations in this country?
I was recently reading a report, Shafiq, by the Runnymede Trust in 2021, and it says that BME people in England still face racial inequalities. So it talks really about the fact that black people are still 18 times more likely to be searched than their white counterparts. BME children make up over half of the child population in prison. 28% are black. This is an increase of 15% over the past decade. By the end of secondary school, Gypsy, Roma and traveller pupils are almost 3 times behind their white counterparts, and black Caribbean students are 11 months behind their white counterparts. If you then talk about the Muslim population in prisons, Muslims are the fastest growing prison population in Britain. I could go on. If, for example, the response to COVID was different, then the white population would have experienced an estimated 58,000 additional deaths between March and May 2020 than black people would have done, etc., etc., etc. So my reading of the situation is that I don't think a lot has changed. I think that the public sector has become much more clever in the way in which it meets the so-called requirements of the Equality Act 2010. So we might now have a lot more people of colour in positions of authority within the civil service, within the public sector, within the institutions. We've got a lot more politicians. But the fact is that actual change on the ground has not happened. 30 years on, the Metropolitan Police, is still considered to be institutionally racist. So I'm afraid things haven't changed. Things have only been managed a lot better than they were before.
But when you look at the positives, we've got a South Asian Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak, in Hamza Yusuf. We've got London Mayor who's Muslim. We've got the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, Anasawa, who's Muslim. Isn't the truth that ethnicity is not much an issue as it used to be in early years?
No, I think that's a bit of a red herring, Shafiq. Look, I was part of Labour Party black sections back in the 80s, and we were fighting to get the first black MP elected in the Labour Party. And when the first 4, I think it was Keith Vaz, there was
Bernie Grant,
Paul Boateng. There were 4 people, Diane Abbott as well. We were absolutely euphoric. We were excited in 1987 when the first 4 black MPs got elected. We were so excited. But actually, now that I look at it, you see, you've not only got Rishi Sunak being an Asian Prime Minister of Asian descent. You mentioned Hamza Yusuf. You also mentioned Sadiq Khan. And then, of course, we've got a whole range of other MPs who are in Parliament, a lot of them Muslim MPs. But actually, my view on that, Shafiq, is that those people are not there to represent Muslim communities. They're not there to represent their race. They are there because they happen to be suitable to the powers that be to deliver on the agendas that need delivering. So, for example, people in these leaders, these Muslim leaders in the Labour Party, for example, they're there to deliver on the Labour Party agenda. They're there to deliver on Labour Party policy, and they're to deliver on their particular wing of the Labour Party, which may be the left wing or the right wing, whatever. They are not there to represent and to promote and to pursue the needs of their communities from where they came. So that is something I feel very strongly about.
Doesn't representation matter?
I think representation matters, but representation doesn't mean anything unless it's backed up with policies that promote proper, meaningful race equality, that tackle Islamophobia, that tackle all the underlying inequalities of society. I mean, I'll give you an example. We were so excited about Barack Obama being the first black president of the United States. And you can remember the feeling that we all had at that time. But, at the same time, in Pakistan, in the border areas, drone strikes went up and more people were killed. And the number of deaths went up in Afghanistan because the American establishment decided on the surge that they wanted to have more troops going in and more people were killed, more civilians were killed. So representation is meaningless. It's a hollow cry unless it's backed up by genuine policy decisions geared towards meeting the disparities in race and religion and faith, etc.
Ihsan, before the break, you were setting out your thoughts on the progress in terms of in politics for ethnic minority communities. You've served as Vince Cable's diversity advisor. You were the party's diversity lead. How do you assess your time in that particular party and progress in terms of ethnic diversity?
I think my time at headquarters as the National Diversity Advisor was important in many respects because we were trying to change the culture of the party. However, I do feel that we did fall short. And the reason why we fell short was because there were real headwinds within the party that were resistant to change. You see, having a race equality advisor or having a race equality agenda it's quite good to have as a badge of honor in a political party. But when you have to actually deliver on the ground, there are other people who sometimes are not interested in that agenda. So the senior leadership may have been interested, but there are people inside the party. So, for example, I felt that at that time, the party was more interested in women's representation and LGBT representation. And race was something which was nice to have, but actually not really something we're going to be bothering with right now. We didn't have that many seats at the time to be able to offer people with a race perspective in mind. So that was difficult. But, there were winnable seats, absolutely major winnable seats, which should have been sort of given, not given, but people should have been allowed to contest those seats and take on those campaigns. But I'm afraid that never happened. So nowhere, to my knowledge, was a proper, true winnable seat given to a BME candidate during any elections at all. So I was a bit disappointed when I left that role. But I think, we did as much as we could. We tried to change the culture. We fought as hard as we could. Some of the battles that we had inside the Labour Party with ethnic minority Liberal Democrats. But, at the end of the day, we don't always get what we want.
Yeah, but were you ready for the pushback? Because you came into that post particularly to promote diversity, enthusiastic. Then you saw the pushback, you saw the challenge, and as you were saying, race was marginalised behind other characteristics. How did you deal with that?
I dealt with it, as you're well aware, because there came a point at which I left that role. I left that role and then I became head of EMLD because I felt that I'd done as much as I could. I could have continued in that role and played all the games that people play, office politics, and I could have said, well, my aim is to become a director and then to become chief of staff and play and start climbing the greasy pole. But I was very disappointed with the fact that race equality was not given the due importance it should have been. And if you recall, I left that role and I became an ordinary member and immediately took up the role of ethnic minority Liberal Democrats because that's where my heart lay. That's what we tried to do. We then took up the battle as an ordinary member as opposed to being a diversity advisor, because as a diversity advisor, my role was diluted.
Controlled?
No, I wouldn't say it was controlled. What I would say is that certain decisions which I wanted were not picked up in the way that I would like those decisions to have been picked up. So there's no control, but, whenever the system wanted to listen to me, the system would listen to me. Yeah. And when the system didn't want to listen to me, they didn't listen to me.
When you look back, and then many years later, you joined Vince Cable's team, you became his special advisor on diversity. How do you assess that period? Because
well, again,
Lib Dems were in opposition, you had lost a lot of they had lost a lot of MPs, and Vince Cable was the new leader, and he brought you in.
Yeah, you see, Vince and I worked very closely together, and he was really supportive of the work that I was doing. I mean, out of all the people in the Lib Dems, I think Vince, his heart was truly in it. He saw what I was trying to do and he valued it. And that's why, he decided that he was going to support me in setting up the diversity engagement group, and he would chair it. Now, him chairing it gave that group a lot of gravitas, and it meant that we could get, our thoughts across into party policy much more quickly. When the diversity engagement group was taken over by, if you remember, Sal Brinton, who then went on to become the party president, again, that's the point at which I left that role within the organisation. I became a member fighting for race equality within the Lib Dems. At that point, Vince then kept in touch with me and kept wanting to know what he could do to help. So if you recall some of the motions that were put to conference, there was a big, heavy hand of Vince behind all of that, ensuring that some of those motions got to conference. And then, of course, when Vince became leader, he then came back to me and wanted me to be his special advisor on diversity with an emphasis on race equality. And so then I came back again a second time.
Yeah. When we look at the wider issue of racism, Islamophobia, sadly, towards British Muslims is on the rise. It's ever present in society. What sort of policies or legislation can help cement anti-racism in our country?
Oh, I mean, Shafiq, it's I honestly think that there is so much happening. Let's just take Islamophobia, for example. Islamophobia is a pernicious form of racism. It's like respectable form of racism. It's the sort of discrimination that takes place, and people will not mind having negative views of Muslims. You know that there's Islamophobia taking place in the media. There's Islamophobia taking place in the political system. It's happening within sports. It's happening at every level of British society. And I'm very worried because when I look around, I'm going off topic slightly because you're talking about legislation. I think it's much bigger than legislation. I'm looking around and all I can see is lots and lots of activists, lots and lots of small groups cropping up everywhere, which are talking about Islamophobia, which are talking about wanting to come and push back against Islamophobic thinking. But there is no coordination. There is no unity. There is no lobby. Like in America, for example, you've got AIPAC, okay? And AIPAC is a very powerful lobby which supports American and Israeli interests.
Relationship,
In the UK, we have no such Muslim body which is about trying to lobby for change within Parliament, within the civil service, within business, within the media, and that's missing. And because we don't have the lobby that I'm talking about, an organized lobby, you know, with its media departments and with its political wing, the Muslim community in the UK is not being fairly treated in terms of policy, in terms of practice, in terms of procedures.
Okay.
And that what I'm saying is, I think that's more important. Just one odd piece of legislation here or there, I don't think is going to matter, because it's that setting up of the lobby which is then going to make sure that there is an agenda to fight Islamophobia, and they'll make sure that it happens.
Yeah, I'm just very quickly, because we've got a break coming up. Tell us a bit about the work that you're doing in Nottingham at the moment.
I think you're aware that in 2015 I had a stroke.
Yeah.
And since then, I took my foot off the pedal a little bit. So I'm not involved in mainstream politics anymore. I've taken a break from my consultancy as well. And I basically, my activity at the moment is mostly around providing mentoring support to a number of young people and people involved in politics in Nottingham. So I'm trying to give something back through mentoring, because I think that's very, very important. That's really what, and also, of course, I'm involved in PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf.
How do you assess Imran Khan's nearly 3 years as Prime Minister of Pakistan? What did he get right, but what did he also get wrong?
I think what Imran Khan got right was that he used that time to, I think, set the bar with regards to the public. He's raised awareness. He's educated people and made sure that they are thinking in a different way. So rather than thinking as slaves, they're now thinking as masters. So young people in Pakistan are very much thinking about development, they're thinking about education, and also they are much more braver now. They ask questions which they never asked before. I think Imran Khan also has managed to get the economy back in shape. It was almost back in shape by the time he was removed. He introduced the health cards. He introduced the system whereby people could have somewhere to eat and sleep at night, the langars, which was very powerful. And of course, exports started to rise, GDP started to rise. And if you recall, the textile sector was booming at the time when he was removed. So Imran Khan did all of that, as well as he was an ambassador for Muslims across the world. He was the first person to raise this whole issue of Islamophobia on international stage. And as you quite rightly know, the United Nations have now allocated a day which is geared towards tackling Islamophobia. And so he created for himself a bar which was high and much higher than previous leaders. And I think for the first time, particularly overseas Pakistanis began to feel proud of their prime minister. And I think we've never had that ability to do that before. So I think there's a lot to be thankful for. In terms of negativities, I think one thing he didn't do, one major mistake he made was to give General Bajwa an extension, and he shouldn't have done that. So no chief of army staff should, or any head of any institution should get extensions. I think that has to stop, because when you start thinking about an extension, these people in powerful positions begin to get involved in the politics of change and control and manipulation in order to justify their extension. And I think that should be put into the constitution. So all of that doesn't get dealt with again in the future. I also think that the mistake he made was to not strengthen NAB, the National Accountability Bureau, because he
so
kept...
just for our viewers' sake, this is accountability, holding politicians, public figures to account on corruption allegations and
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He kept well away from the National Accountability Bureau because he didn't want to influence it. Actually, all the time, it was being influenced by the establishment, and the judiciary was being influenced by the establishment. So this Imran Khan that we see now is much more sharper, is more aware, he's wiser, because before, during those 3 years, there was a lot of naivety in the way in which he conducted governance.
Okay, so
absolutely.
Yeah, and he was deposed in that historic vote of confidence, becoming the first prime minister that was voted out of office in the National Assembly. At that point, when he left as prime minister, his party took a decision to resign from the National Assembly. Looking back in hindsight, as everything that's happened over the last 12 months, was that also a wrong decision?
From my personal point of view, I think it was not the wrong decision. It was the right decision. And the reason why is, look, had he not have taken that decision, he would have no levers of pressure upon Shahbaz Sharif and his government. Had they have stayed in there, then the establishment would have continued to have manipulated the parliamentary system. Elections would not have taken place, which they're not taking place right now either. But Imran Khan had to create a level of pressure to force Shahbaz Sharif and the PDM into a situation whereby they have to accept the pressure for elections. Now, had they stayed in Parliament, I think that pressure would not be possible, because right now it's very clear, it's very obvious that this is a weak minority government that doesn't even have an opposition. And that fact is not lost on people in Pakistan. Since that time, because of the narrative and the issues that he raised and the way in which he pushed back, his ratings have gone through the roof. You know as well as I do, the polls that have taken place in Pakistan show him well above 70% of popularity. And that actually is a very conservative figure.
Yeah, but he left the scene when the government, National Assembly, the PDM government, has only a 2-seat majority, and he could have challenged them in the Assembly, and he's not been able to do that. He now wants to get back in the Assembly, and he wants some of those resignations rescinded.
Well, look, Shafiq, he knew straight away that these guys are merely puppets. These people, Shahbaz Sharif and the whole PDM crowd, they are not their own masters. They're not their own bosses. The real game was being played behind the scenes by the military establishment. Which is something which the military would disagree with and said that they're apolitical and don't have any involvement in those party politics. Of course, but General Bajwa is widely now recognized in Pakistan, even amongst all the political commentators, the journalists, everybody is openly talking about his role in Operation Regime Change. So he knew that even if they were in there, with the amount of money that was used in Sindh House in Islamabad for the horse trading and bartering and to buy off these so-called lote, that him staying in there wouldn't have made a difference. Well, he could have performed accountability in the national parliament. You've got a leader of the opposition. Can you imagine a leader of opposition in this country agreeing with the government of Shahbaz Sharif at every turn? And that PTI's narrative is missing from the National Assembly. But that's exactly the farce that he wanted to expose by leaving the Assembly. By leaving the Assembly and saying, I'm not prepared to sit with these people because they are chores, they are this, they are that, they're corrupt. And the whole system has been brought about. The only reason I'm confident, the only reason why Imran Khan actually walked out there peacefully was because it was a decision made by the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice. his narrative has always been about respect for law, respect for law and order, and respect for the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice. He couldn't do anything other than do that to accept defeat at that point. But he had to expose the farcical nature of what happened.
Okay, and we've just got a couple of minutes before we go to our break, and I just wanted to ask you, as you reflected on Imran Khan's time as Prime Minister, how do you assess the last 12 months of Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif in government and his coalition partners?
Well, Shafiq, these people, as I said to you before, they are puppets. They're not their own bosses. Nothing they do is controlled by them. And so, if you look, number one, they don't have public acceptability. They have no legitimacy. They've not been voted into those positions.
Well, they have. They've been voted in the National Assembly vote, which Imran Khan decided to desert. So they've now got the freedom to do whatever they want. They can pass whatever policy because your party is not even in the room.
Yeah, so they're not in the room, as I said, because he had a strategy to expose these individuals, and he's carrying out that strategy. As a result of that strategy, I think the Pakistani public have now woken up, and he's probably got 75 to 80% of the public behind him. And leaving the assembly and making that narrative was part of that plan, which I think worked personally. But in terms of what they've done over the last year, they've tanked the economy. So the economy is in ruins. They've ruined the relationship between Pakistan and its traditional ally, China, who is very, very wary now of the fact that this government is apparently, supposedly, allegedly controlled from Washington. Okay. And so this has caused great problems in that regard.
In geopolitics as well. Now, there's been a serious conflict, and we do really want to talk about the rest of the time about overseas Pakistanis and your involvement in that. But let's just briefly look at this breakdown. There's a serious conflict between the executive, the government of Shahbaz Sharif, who are refusing to have elections in Punjab, and the judiciary. What do you make of this standoff between these institutions?
Basically, what's happening is that the parliament headed by Shahbaz Sharif, the minority parliament, they are worried to death about the elections. They don't want the elections. They know that once the elections take place in Punjab and Northwest Frontier Province it covers about 67 to 70% of the population of Pakistan. So once those elections are held, and if Imran Khan gets 75% in both of those two provinces, then basically all the provincial seats, 75% will be with PTI, but then also the National Assembly seats for the elections when they take place will also go to PTI. Plus, they will have control over all the organs of the province. So the police, the local electoral staff members, etc., etc., etc. The resources will be there. What they're worried about is that they will be completely annihilated, and then there'll be a speedy movement towards a general election. Once that happens, then Imran Khan will come back to them and start holding them accountable. So basically, they're holding on to the tiger's tail and don't want to let go because the tiger will eat them.
Yeah, and what's your prediction in terms of the Supreme Court? Do you think the Supreme Court will make a judgment in favour of these elections happening?
I think so. Yeah. My feeling is that the Justice Bandial will make a strong recommendation. He'll give a court ruling that elections will. It's already given the ruling, so the ruling is there that on May the 14th the elections will have to take place. What we've got to think about is whether there will be a contempt of court, and if there's contempt of court, then a whole load of people will be disqualified and removed from office, and in some instances, Article 6 will be implemented. That's what they don't want, and what they're doing at the moment, they're playing brinkmanship, and they're trying to cut it right down to the wire. What's happening is, on one side, you've got the parliamentary group, and then you've got the establishment, all fighting behind the scenes to resist the judicial order from the Chief Justice. What I think is going to happen, and that's just a personal view, I think what will happen is that they will resist the elections, hoping that the Chief Justice will buckle. The Chief Justice will not, elections will not take place and the Chief Justice will not buckle. What will then happen is essentially in Pakistan, it becomes a banana republic. There is no rule of law. All the institutions and the security services have no constitution because they breached the constitution to rely on. At that point, it all depends upon whether Imran Khan, who's said that PTI and the general public are going to be called out onto the streets. Now, if they come out onto the streets, as he promised, in the numbers that he can rally, then that will create a real serious crisis. My view is that what the Chief of Army Staff is looking for and the establishment are looking for is to create an emergency situation. If they create an emergency situation, Shahbaz Sharif and his government can pack up and go home, get on their flights and come to Europe or wherever they go to and sit it out in the safety of another country. And then Pakistan will come under military emergency rule. Now, if that happens, then as under General Zia, elections didn't take place for another 11 years. And then, if you recall what happened under General Pervez Musharraf, elections never took place for many years. That will let Shahbaz Sharif off the hook, and I do believe the establishment have an inkling towards that as well. Okay. That's what I think they're hoping to happen.
Yeah, and the establishment, let's just make it clear, the military of Pakistan would dispute what you are suggesting there. They would say they're apolitical and they don't have any interest in the party political shenanigans and are just an institution serving and protecting the country of Pakistan. Right, let's talk about, I just wanted to say that obviously because they're not here to defend themselves. Let's just talk about overseas Pakistanis. Many people still have an attachment to that beautiful land because it's the land of our forefathers. In your case, it's where you were born. Do you think the fact that overseas Pakistanis' money is accepted, yet they're not given the right to vote, they're not respected by politicians in the National Assembly?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons for me getting involved with Imran Khan and in supporting Imran Khan was because of his strong support for overseas Pakistanis. Overseas Pakistanis literally keep the government and the economy afloat in Pakistan through the massive remittances that they send. They invest in Pakistan. Overseas Pakistanis visit Pakistan and spend hard money in Pakistan. So we in this country and in America and the 10 million overseas Pakistanis who live across the world, they contribute massively to the Pakistani economy. Now, the fact is that the majority of those support Imran Khan. I would probably argue 90%, 95% of overseas Pakistanis, if you talk to them, they will tell you that they will support PTI and Imran Khan. That's the reason why the present regime in Pakistan are not interested in giving overseas Pakistanis the vote. So Imran Khan and PTI want to give them the vote, and I think that's a very important point. But just coming back onto the issue of overseas Pakistanis, look, one of the reasons and the main reason why I got involved was because I felt that overseas Pakistanis are not engaged enough in what's happening in Pakistan. Because Pakistan is very important for us. We all have got family there. All our families have got some form of investment in Pakistan. All of us travel to Pakistan. We go to Pakistan. We want our children to go to Pakistan. We speak the same language, culturally, historically, ancestrally. You know, we are Pakistani, regardless of having lived in this country all our lives. So overseas Pakistanis need to get more involved in what's happening in order to make sure that the environment in Pakistan and the country in Pakistan is safe for people to go back to. And if we want our children to at least maintain a level of cultural uniformity with the past, they have to have that link with Pakistan.
Yeah, they're going to have that link. And having that respect, and lots of people that go from here I mean, the visa now, you've got the NICOM card, and that's a lot easier. You don't have to go and get a visa and people being humiliated. But there is a lot of services that are promised for overseas Pakistanis. We didn't see them. If Imran Khan comes back and PTI are in government, what things do they need to introduce to make life easier for overseas Pakistanis?
It's strange you should raise that, because Imran Khan has recently given an indication into his thinking around what's the most urgent priority for him if and when he gets back into government. And he has said openly that the main priority for him is to open up the channels of investment in Pakistan. And he went on to say that overseas Pakistanis have got to be given special rights. I mean, the right to vote is a basic right. It's a human right, as far as he's concerned. For all of those people who hold NICOP cards, which is dual nationality, they should be allowed to vote. But on top of that, he wants Pakistanis to invest in Pakistan, and he wants to set up new incentives, particularly for overseas Pakistanis, because he knows that one of the quickest ways of removing this deficit and introducing overseas dollars and pounds back into the Pakistani economy is to get overseas Pakistanis to start engaging with Pakistan again. Because, as you know, the remittances have fallen now. So his priority is overseas Pakistanis. And what he wants to do is he wants to have special banking systems for overseas Pakistanis, special incentives for overseas Pakistanis for investment and settling in Pakistan. When they buy property, there needs to be guarantees that the properties they buy will be dealt with through a separate system, which means that they won't be gazumped and land won't be occupied. He wants a special system of courts for overseas Pakistanis, everything to make overseas Pakistanis feel very confident inside Pakistan. And he's placed that as a priority. If you recall, when he was in power, he set up the complaints portal. And that worked really, really well, you know, whilst he was in power. I mean, obviously it's gone to the dogs now, but at that time, it was very, very successful. He also introduced courts for overseas Pakistani land issues and special departments that dealt with land grabbing and property that was overtaken by the land mafia. So these are the sort of things which he will introduce when he gets back into power.
We're coming towards the end of the programme. We've just got two very quick questions, if you can give me some brief answers. How do you see the future of Pakistan in light of what's happening at the moment?
At the moment, Pakistan is at a crossroads at the moment. And I honestly believe that it's down to the Pakistani public now. Forget about the establishment, forget about, you know, the political system, the courts and anything. It's the Pakistani public. If they come out onto the streets, I think Pakistan can be saved. If it's saved, Pakistan has got a wonderful future. The reason is it's got a geopolitical location which is very powerful. It's got a very strong, healthy population of 230, 240 million, of which there is a big segment of that which is a young population, a vibrant population. It's got, you know, good geographical locations for tourism, and it's got lots of natural resources. Pakistan is going places if the public come out. If they don't, then I'm afraid what I can see is that Pakistan will descend into becoming a greater banana republic, okay, where the rule of the jungle will apply.
Okay, one word answer to this final question to you, sir. Do you think Imran Khan will win the next election whenever that comes?
Absolutely, hands down. There's no way that you can remove that right from Imran Khan.
Sadie, we ran out of time. Issan Ghazni, thank you so much for joining us tonight and being my special guest. I wish you well and much love to the family. That was Issan Ghazni. He was joining us live from his home in Nottingham.